The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the 6th day, mostly through the 6th day actually, of this 8-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate, the Rohatsu sesshin, memorializing the Buddha's own awakening, his great awakening, in northern New Mexico at Mountain Gate in December 2020. And I would like to once more share with you what I shared yesterday, I believe, was Norman Waddell's rendition of Hawkween's rendition of the process by which Dogen, the great Zen master, the great Soto Zen master, considered the founder of Soto Zen in Japan, his awakening experience, because it's kind of relevant to all of us. There is, by the way, a documentary called Zen that is available. You can get a DVD, I think, through Amazon.com, I'm not sure. And it's a beautiful, very inspiring documentary in Japanese, made in Japan, and I think probably also China. At least there's an area that is shown that I don't think exists in Japan, of Dogen's life, his whole life, actually. Well, not from birth, but from the time when he was quite young and his mother was dying. And that is what catapulted him into Zen practice. So, as you know, this book, Poison Blossoms in a Thicket of Thorns, was translated by Norman Waddell. But first, I will share the day 6 Rohatsu exhortations of Hawkween. The 6th night, an attendant brought a cup of tea for the master. He said, when Zen Master Yosai, founder of Kenninji, and by the way, Kenninji is where Dogen trained, and one of the places where Dogen trained, in Kyoto. When Zen Master Yosai, founder of Kenninji, was in China, he took ill during a spell of excessive heat. An old priest cured him by giving him some tea to drink. When Yosai returned to Japan, he took tea seeds back with him. He smuggled them back, actually. They were not allowed to be out of China, for the palace in Kyoto. Some seeds were later planted in Uji, and some went to Myoe Shonin, who planted them at his temple west of the capital. Because of this, Yosai is regarded as the father of tea in Japan. The virtue of tea lies in its mildly bitter taste, which works to strengthen the heart. When the heart is sound, the other bodily organs also function normally. Myoe said, tea is good for driving off the sleep demon and should be used by those practicing the way. It does keep one nicely awake, not quite the same jagged experience as coffee can give. And also it doesn't have a sudden depletion of energy that coffee can also affect. It's smooth going up, you're bright awake, gently awake, focused, and it lasts for quite a long time. But you can't sleep if you've been drinking it. At least most people can't. When it comes to strengthening the heart, however, nothing can compare to strenuous religious practice. If you devote yourself to your practice single-mindedly until your arduous effort becomes one with your very being, the divine energy that is within you will shine forth bright and clear. It's a couple of adjectives here that we need to clarify, because As you know, Hakuin was a dynamic human being, and he was so intense in his own early practice that he actually made himself sick. And that's not helpful. So with our Zen practice, the aim, of course, is to come to awakening for the benefit of all beings and to manifest that in our daily life. But the way we do it is to sink deep within and search quietly, wordlessly, for the truth of who we really are. Whether we're working on a koan or whether we're simply doing the extended out breath alone. And of course, if we're working on a koan, we're also doing the extended out breath. Either way, it's a practice of awareness, of increasing presence. It's not a practice of driving force. It's not a practice of striving. That can cause a great deal of body tension, and it doesn't really work that well. When it comes to strengthening the heart, however, nothing can compare to strenuous religious practice. If you devote yourself to your practice single-mindedly until your arduous effort becomes one with your very being, the divine energy that is within you will shine forth bright and clear. As Zen Master Jimyo said, and he's the one that stabbed himself in his thigh every time he started to fall asleep. As Zen Master Jimyo said, the arduous effort expended by the ancients possesses a radiance that cannot help but spread and grow. Arduous in the sense of focused, yes. Arduous in the sense of relatively intense, but intense in a focused way, not intense in a forced way. This is our practice. Spurring students through the barriers, and that is the writing that when Hakuin was totally discouraged in his practice and ready to quit, he happened in a temple courtyard where they were airing the scrolls, and he picked up that particular one, spurring students through the practice. And in it, he closed his eyes, put his finger down on a place in the document, opened his eyes, and it was the story of Jimyo, who was intently focused on coming to awakening to the point where he didn't even want to sleep. And when his body did want to sleep, he would jab himself in the thigh with his awl, which of course is very painful, and wake himself up. And he did indeed have deepening awakening experiences. And that was enough inspiration to bring Hakuin back to his practice. Spurring students through the barriers says, when you're able to control your mind at all times, your goal of realization is as good as achieved. Control means what? We struggle in our Zen practice with thoughts coming through, with feelings coming through, with ideas, with images, with visions, all kinds of stuff filling our head with distractions. When we are able to focus our mind, letting ourselves drop deep beneath all of that clutter, that is controlling our mind. It's not getting rid of thoughts. It's putting them in their place, basically, which is they're just sort of the activity of the brain and the residue of thinking. Most of what we have going on in our minds when we're sitting zazen, or even when we're not sitting zazen, is what Mitra-roshi used to call thoughting. Just fragments of conversations, bits and pieces of stories or movies, well, anything you've put into your head, anything you've witnessed on the screen or in life, can play out again in your mind. And that is thoughting, unless it's on focus. We have a real important tool in thinking. We can do a lot with thought. But in terms of Zen practice, thinking really is not the important focus at all. We're going beneath thought, beyond thought, to what cannot be expressed in words. The expression of trying to describe an awakening experience is like that of somebody who's mute, who's trying to tell about a dream he had. Spurring students through the barriers says, when you are able to control your mind at all times, your goal of realization is as good as achieved. You should all deem the arduous effort you put forth in your practice as something of priceless worth. And again, it's so important not to get caught up in whether or not you've got thoughts happening, because that's really not so relevant. To be able to focus on the experience in your body and to search wordlessly for the meaning of life, for the answer to your koan, for what you're yearning to comprehend, all of that. That's practice. The rest of it can kind of take care of itself. Just like if you hear the neighborhood dog barking when you're doing Zazen, you don't try to go out and shut it up. The same way with the thoughts in your head. You don't try to go out and shut them up. You drop beneath them. Then there is no resistance. Then there's not a problem. They'll just die on the vine. He continues, there was a priest named Bummei from the northern provinces who wanted to come to Shoinji. He tried in various ways for 6 years to gain permission to study here. And I told him, to me, it doesn't matter how great and celebrated a priest is. He could have the purple robe from the emperor for all I care. It is if his Dharma eye remains unopened, as far as I'm concerned, he's still a novice. He still needs a heavy dose of scolding and reviling. Well, that's not how we do it here. Anyone who harbors so much as a thought for the world or the slightest feeling of self-importance couldn't derive any benefit from visiting me. The slightest feeling of self-importance. And that is a danger when we do have a Kensho experience, that we start feeling very self-important, which is kind of the opposite of what it's meant to do. Bummei wouldn't give up. I'm no different from a novice, he said. Someone newly arrived in the training hall, intent solely on achieving the great Dharma. Please, Master Hakuin, don't begrudge me your compassion. Give me the benefit of your teaching. Let me encounter your thundering shouts. Feel the stinging blows rain from your staff. I am prepared to lay down my life in the pursuit of the way. I allowed Bummei to come. He spent one summer, 3 months of arduous practice in the training hall, where he was tempered and refined under countless blows from my staff. And again, this is not about that kind of so-called encouragement. Japanese culture is very different from American culture. And we stopped using the keisaku, although it still sits on the altar here ceremoniously, because many people who have experienced trauma come to train here. And to even hear someone else struck with a stick, even though it's not meant to be anything but encouragement. It's not meant to be punishment. It's not meant to be abusive. Still, it can trigger increasing trauma. And so we simply don't use it. When we stopped using it, remarkably, one senior student was alarmed because he felt like He needed it in order to focus his mind. And so that is another reason why we don't use it, because we should not depend on any outward circumstances to be able to focus our mind on our practice. It's not so easy to simply do it without a sort of a framework, but we do have the structure of the Zendo, the schedule, and so on, and the required Soto Zen meeting with the teacher that hopefully keeps people on track. It's important. We're not about beating enlightenment into you. It's about you uncovering it yourself. Because it's there, there's nowhere else for it. I allowed Bume to come. He spent one summer, 3 months of arduous practice in the training hall, where he was tempered and refined under countless blows from my staff. Finally, he broke through. He suddenly realized the great uplifting matter of our school. He vowed when he left that he would remain my student forever. A spirit of single-minded commitment and iron-willed resolve cannot rest until it reaches the final, ultimate attainment of the Buddha Dharma. And that is what we're about, reaching the ultimate attainment of the Buddha Dharma. Anything short of that is really robbing ourselves of our potential. And yet, so many people are satisfied with one puny kensho. So here, again, is Ha Guing's reciting of Dogen's, where is it now? Of Dogen's experience in China. Dogen, by the way, was ordained at 13. As you already heard, his mother died when he was 8, and that caused him a great deal of questioning. She encouraged that. And of course, he went on to become an amazing teacher, one who is credited with bringing the Soto school to Japan. Really, not quite inventing it. He trained in Rinzai in China, but his own personality was such that the way he ended up teaching became the Soto school. On the second day of the 7th month, in the first year of Baoqing, which was 1227, so he would have been 27 years old then, premier transition point in many people's lives, 27, 28, 29. Zen master Eihei Dogen set out with his teacher Mitra-roshi, Hoshi, in a trading vessel bound for distant Song, China. At the monastery on Mount Tiantung, he requested and was granted an interview with Zen master Jujing. He had gone to China with Myozen. By the way, Myozen died and never returned to Japan. He died after a few years there. But they checked out a number of different Chinese temples. Back in that era, China was the source of deep training for Zen monks in Japan. And because the written language was the same back then, it's diverged since then. And of course, the spoken language has never been the same. It was possible to communicate between the Chinese masters and the Japanese monks. Or some of the Chinese masters actually came to Japan and taught Japanese monks in Japan. He made 3 bows to the master and said, "Although I am but an insignificant young monk from a far-off country," and here and it is an expression of humility, which is vital for our practice. If we think we're somebody important, it's very difficult to practice Zen. We have to let go of that self-image enough to be humble enough to go into a place of not knowing, which for somebody who thinks they're very important is a scary place to be. He made 3 bows to the master and said, "Although I am but an insignificant young monk from a far-off country, I rejoice that karma from my past lives has enabled me to be admitted into your Dharma assembly. Please, Master, in your great pity and compassion, teach me the true essentials of the way." And he has had quite a bit of training by this point. He was for 7 years at Kenninji, where Myozen was his teacher. And so he's not a brand new monk. And clearly he was very dedicated, otherwise he would not have gone all the way to China, which was a very dangerous journey back then. Juqing lit a stick of incense, placed his palms together in gasho, and said, "Ever since our Zen school began the direct, undeviating transmission of the authentic Dharma from master to disciple, it has always had as its fundamental principle never leaving the training hall, and has had Zazen alone as the authentic way of practice." And that's what makes Zen Buddhism unique. It is, its training is through meditation. Never leaving the training hall. That's metaphorical because you go to the training hall for so many years. Normally in Japan, it's expected to be about 20 of intensive training. And then you don't stop training. You never stop training. In everyday life, training can take place. And that is so important in America because so many of you are simply lay people. And you have jobs, and you have families, and you have responsibilities out in the world. You can't just give yourself 20 years to a temple. And yet, you still have the deep yearning to become free, the deep experience of bodhicitta, yearning to come to awakening for the benefit of all beings. And, of course, it is possible right there. One of our participants who cannot be there full time for the entire session has unwittingly come upon a very effective way of continuing the practice going by they were present at the first several days full time, and then they had to go to work. And when there was a little bit of a break, for example, or during the metta practice period, they would turn and face the Zendo, which was still on their computer, and focus on Zazen, focus on the practice. And the Zendo view was behind them even when they were working on their other computer for work. So it was always in the background. And with that going on, there was a sense of support in focus. And focus in our work is just as important as focus in our Zazen. And when we truly focus in our work and are truly present, whatever we're doing, whether it's brushing our teeth, tying our shoes, working on the computer, taking care of the kids, washing the dishes, driving through whatever traffic there might be, it doesn't matter. With our mind fully focused on the present moment, that is practice as well. And that's an important aspect of practice for everyone, whether they're living in a temple or not. A temple is kind of easy to practice in because the whole schedule is set in such a way that extraneous things are largely not there. You don't have to go to work every day. Yes, there are responsibilities in the temple, but they don't take up every single weekday of your day. They are integrated into the practice schedule. And you have the support of all the other people in the temple as well, so that there's a lot of support. And the schedule of sitting, the schedule of meditation is very strong. So that's easy to practice there. Although there are still the interactions with your fellow monks, and whether a person is a lay person or actually fully ordained in the temples that we are part of, you're still called a monk because you're doing the monk training. But if you're out and about, living your daily life with family, with friends, with work responsibilities, with the world in your face, basically, it's considerably more difficult. And this is why it is said that to practice as a layperson is actually, because it's more difficult, actually has greater potential for going deeper, because you're having to do it in the midst of activity. And that's vital. All of us, ordained or not, have to learn how to practice in the midst of activity. We have to learn how to be present in the midst of activity. And practicing in the midst of activity is not like that old story of the Zen master who was invited to one of the temple supporters' homes for a dinner. And he took along a young attendant monk. And when he went to the house, the Zen master engaged fully with the family, enjoyed his meals, joking and telling stories and so on and so forth. And the monk went off in a corner and sat zazen. When the evening ended and they were headed back to the temple, the master rebuked the monk, saying that he was not doing zazen. He was removing himself from a very important situation in which he could have been practicing in the midst of activity. He did not understand what Zen practice is meant to be. When we are in the midst of a situation, to be fully there in the midst of the situation, not to remove ourselves, whether through dissociation or some other means, is doing practice. It's doing life. And it's a very important aspect of both practice and life. So Juqing lit a stick of incense, placed his palms together in gasho, and said, "Ever since our Zen school began the direct, undeviating transmission of the authentic Dharma from master disciple, it has always had its fundamental principle, never leaving the training hall, and has had Zazen alone as the authentic way of practice. Today, Zen students in temples throughout the land may sit many hours in meditation without lying down to sleep. But because they do not encounter an enlightened master, they never learn the way of entering true jhana, which is true meditation. Because of that, the zazen they practice differs not in the least from that espoused by the heretical teachers. Even if you continued performing such practice until the end of time, they would never be able to enter the great jhana of the Buddha." Dogen performed 3 prostrations and said, "In your great pity and compassion, please teach me the correct way to enter dhyana." Juqing lit incense, performed gasho, and said, "Brother Gen, when doing zazen, you should place your mind above the palm of your left hand." And that's basically in your hara. Dogen performed 3 bows and withdrew. Some days later, he entered Juqing's chambers, made 3 bows, and said, "I placed my mind above the palm of my left hand, as you instructed. Now both my hands have totally disappeared. There is nowhere to place my mind." That expresses his having gone into a level of samadhi where he no longer was, let's put it this way, he was no longer aware of placing his mind above his left palm. And as you heard in other teishos, going into deep samadhi is an essential prerequisite to coming to awakening. So, a few days later, Dogen entered Jujing's chambers, made 3 bows, and said, "I did as you instructed, placing my mind throughout my body. Now both my mind and body have fallen away. It is like a brilliant sun illuminating the vast heavens, although the round shape cannot be seen." This time, Jujing lit incense, performed gasho, and said with a smile, "Brother Gen, for kalpas on end, you have been revolving in the cycle of birth and death. Today, you have entered the great and true jhana, where defilements do not arise. Preserve and protect this. Never let go of it." Dogen performed 3 bows, 3 additional bows, and then withdrew with tears in his eyes. Never let it go. That doesn't mean trying to keep that mind state happening, but rather to respond to the flow of life. So focused, so present, that there's nobody responding to the flow of life, and yet everything unfolds in appropriate ways. We respond to circumstances instead of reacting to them. It means we are fully alive, fully aware. And now I'd like to share a little bit of Dogen's own teachings. This is from The Heart of Dogen's Shobo Genzo. Again, we have a translation by Norman Waddell, along with Masao Abe, who is a very highly respected translator who unfortunately succumbed to Parkinson's disease, which ravages many bodies in Japan. It may be because in their earnest attempt to produce the most beautiful vegetables and fruit, they employ a lot of pesticides. And there's a pretty high incidence of Parkinson's among people in Japan, unfortunately. So this is a translation, as I said, by these 2 eminent men. And this is from Dogen's Fukan Zazengi, which is about practicing how to practice. "The way is originally perfect and all-pervading. How could it be contingent upon practice and realization? The Dharma vehicle is utterly free and untrammeled. What need is there for concentrated effort?" Meaning, Hakuin's blows and shouts and all the rest. And of course, there's a strong tradition, particularly in Rinzai Zen, of shouts and blows and so on. Rinzai himself was famous for his shouts. But again, we're talking about different culture there. In America, when people are shouted at, it doesn't have the same effect that it does if people are shouted at in China or Japan in ancient times. And this is important to recognize. What need is there for our concentrated effort? Indeed, the whole body is far beyond the world's dust. Who could believe in a means to brush it clean? And there we're referring back to the verse in the 5th Patriarch's temple when the 5th Patriarch was asking his monks to write a verse expressing their awakening level or their clarity of mind. And Shinshu, who was the head monk, wrote something about the mind is a mirror bright, and we need to wipe it clean so that no dust alights. And the 6th Patriarch to be saw that poem and realized it was a good practice poem, but it was not a depth of awakening. And he wrote another one, says, there is no mirror right, so there's no place for dust to alight. Which is kind of why it's not so easy to practice sometimes, because there's no thing that we are trying to get. It's a different experience from how we are taught to learn. We go to school for years and we're trained to think our way through things, but we cannot think our way through Zen practice. It's kind of feeling our way in the dark. And when we get accustomed to the lack of feeling of support, lack of feeling of structure, when we're doing that, we are on our way deeper. There's an anxiety that comes up around that. And when we allow ourselves to become the anxiety, feel it in our body, and search wordlessly right through that, then our practice goes deeper. Dogen continues, how could you believe in a means to brush it clean? It is never apart from you, right here where you are. What use is there going off here and there to practice? It's right here now. And yet, if there is the slightest discrepancy, the way is as distant as heaven from earth. If the least like or dislike arises, the mind is lost in confusion. Suppose you gain pride of understanding, inflate your own achievement, glimpse the wisdom that runs through all things, and attain the way and clarify your mind, raising the aspiration to escalade the very sky. You're making an initial partial excursion through the frontiers of the Dharma, but you're still deficient in the vital way of total emancipation. More confirmation of the need to never stop, particularly not after initial Kensho or his second one. And as you've heard so many times, Hakuin himself had 19 major Kensho experiences before the final one in his 50s, when he finally found his mind was totally at rest. And there's just a little bit more from Dogen here. This is in the Bendowa part of his teachings, which he wrote when he returned from China. Buddha Tathagatas all have a wonderful means, unexcelled and free from human agency, for transmitting the wondrous Dharma and realizing supreme and complete awakening. That this means is only passed directly from the Buddha to Buddha without deviation is due to the Juju Samadhi, which is its touchstone. And this is one of the things about Rinzai Zen, which unfortunately seems to have gotten of less important in the Soto Zen in more recent years. Well, I don't know about immediately recent years, but in the 1900s, the official Soto Zen establishment determined that it was not essential to have Kensho in order to teach. In Rinzai, it is. And Rinzai, this is something that is vital because it is personal experience of the same awakening that the Buddha experienced. And in this way, the teaching can go down unskewed. And that's very important. To disport oneself freely in this samadhi, the right entrance is proper sitting in zazen. The Dharma is amply present in every person. The Dharma is amply present in every person. No matter what you think, no matter what you assume, no matter how insecure you feel about it or incompetent you may feel about it, is still there. The Dharma is amply present in every person, but without practice, it is not manifested. Without realization, it is not attained. It is not a question of one or many. Let loose of it and it fills your hands. It is not bounded vertically or horizontally. Speak it and it fills your mouth. Within this Dharma, Buddhas dwell everlastingly, leaving no perceptions in any sphere or direction. All living beings uses unceasingly, with no sphere or direction appearing in their perceptions. This Dharma is mysterious, vast, all-encompassing, always present, and yet it is not a thing. To open our minds beyond what we normally assume is vital in our practice. And now you've had basically 6 days, most of 6 days, in which to plumb the depths of your mind. And of course, there's been ups and downs, and of course, there's been distractions. That's part of the practice. The most important thing is to be as absolutely present as possible, as much of the time as possible. Present with this yearning, this subtle questioning, ignoring what goes on upstairs and diving deep into the unknown and continuing to dive deep into the unknown, feeling our way in the dark, yet with the support of all of us, and not just all of us here in this sesshin, but everyone everywhere practicing Zen. And there are millions of people at this point in time that are practicing this Zazen in these Rohatsu Sesshin, because this is the traditional time of year for Rohatsu Sesshin. One of the biggest challenges for Americans is a sense of not being good enough, not having what it takes. But we all do have what it takes. We all are perfect, whole, and complete, just as we are. We don't need to add anything. We don't need to divest ourselves of anything, but simply to sink beneath the yada yada of our minds in this amazing, incredible quest. And of course, the extended breath makes it so much easier to do that. So give yourself to the physical experience, the sensations in your body of breathing out and extending that out breath as far as you can without gasping. In this search, it's as if through the breath, you can reach farther, you can reach deeper than any other way. So make good use of it. And in this way, without you realizing it, you are going deeper. You are becoming little by little more free. And of course, the important thing is to keep at it, to keep at it. So I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.